Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, Just Energy Transition Partnerships, Insights from Indonesia and Vietnam, jointly organized by the Climate Change in Southeast Asia Program and Vietnam Studies Program at ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. I'm Xia Hui, your MC for today. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping matters for today. Firstly, if you encounter any technical issues, please use the chat function to reach out to our technical support team. Secondly, to ask any questions to the speakers, please use the Q&A function stating your name and affiliation together with your question. You can send in your questions at any time. Lastly, if you would like to stay informed on our climate change programs activities, do sign up for updates at the URL which I will be sharing in the chat box. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for the session. Dr. Mirza Huda is lead researcher of energy and climate at the Climate Change in Southeast Asia program here at ISEAS. I will now invite him to begin the webinar. Dr. Mirza, please.
Thank you very much, Xia Hui. Very good afternoon and a warm welcome to everyone joining us for this webinar that will examine the implications of the Just Energy Transition Partnership, or JETP, Indonesia and Vietnam. So the JETP initiative was launched at the sidelines of COP26 in 2021, and it is a potential funding mechanism to help developing countries transition away from coal dependence and towards greater uptake of renewable energy. And while the JETP provides many opportunities, it also has some gaps and challenges. And to elaborate on the role the JETP can play in energy transition in Indonesia and Vietnam, we have with us today 4 very distinguished speakers. But before introducing them, I will request all the speakers to turn on their cameras so we can take a picture for sharing on social media. Thank you very much for that. And so now I will briefly introduce the speakers, but please do refer to the webinar notice for their full bio. Our first speaker is Melinda Martinus. She's lead researcher at the ASEAN Studies Center and Climate Change in Southeast Asia program at ISEAS. Ms. Melinda's research interests are on sustainable development, smart city initiatives, digitalization, and policy for advancing climate ambition in ASEAN countries. Ms. Melinda is production editor of ASEAN Focus, which is the biannual flagship magazine produced by ISEAS. She's also co-editor of the Institute's 2 annual survey reports, The State of Southeast Asia and the Southeast Asia Climate Outlook. Our second speaker is Paul Butarbutar, who currently serves as the deputy head of the JETP Indonesia Secretariat. Paul has more than 24 years of experience in environmental and energy advisory work, which includes managing air pollution and waste, climate financing, carbon pricing, renewable energy, and energy efficiency investment. He has advised various ministries in Indonesia, including the Ministry of National Development and the Ministry of Finance, as well as multilateral institutions such as the UNDP and ADB. Paul actively contributed to Article 6 negotiations during COP26. Our third speaker is Ms. Nguyen Phuong Mai, who is the Vietnam Country Director for the Asia Group based in Hanoi. Ms. Nguyen spent 10 years at the Ministry of Industry and Trade, or MOIT's International Cooperation Department, where she managed relations with international partners to develop Vietnam's industry and power sectors. In 2011, Ms. Nguyen joined the General Directorate of Energy at MOIT, achieving the rank of Deputy Director. From 2017 to late 2022, she served as Deputy Chief of Office at MOIT's Electricity and Renewable Energy Authority, overseeing critical energy cooperation issues and formulating policies for the development of Vietnam's power and renewable energy sectors. We are also pleased to have with us Dr. Julia Behrens, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Department for Social Anthropology at Bielefeld University in Germany. Dr. Julia holds a PhD in Southeast Asian Studies from Humboldt University in Berlin and has spent part of her studies at the Vietnam National University and the University of Glasgow. Her research interests are on political ecology, social ecological transformation, and Southeast Asia. Aside from her studies, Dr. Julia has headed the Climate and Energy Project in Asia of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation based in Hanoi. So I will request the speakers to share their insights first, and we will have 4 presentations of 15 minutes, followed by a question and answer session of 25 minutes at the end. And we really want to make this session interactive, so please do use the Q&A function to post your questions, and please mention your name and affiliation and who you are directing the question to. Without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Melinda Martinus to share her insights on the broad implications of the JETP on Southeast Asia.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Mirza. Good afternoon, everyone joining from Singapore and beyond. Thank you for coming to this webinar. Sorry about that. Thank you for coming to this webinar, where we will unpack the implementation of Just Energy Transition Partnerships, or JETPs, in Indonesia and Vietnam. Before we delve into the insights from our esteemed speakers, allow me to provide an overview of JETPs. Next slide, please. Yeah, many of us who follow climate change closely often focus on the annual United Nations Climate Change Conferences, or known as COPs, while COPs serve as forums for countries to establish targets. A lot of actions often happen beyond these conferences. In recent years, we've seen the rise of multilateral institutions dedicated to fulfilling climate pledges. JETP is one of the examples. It emerged during COP26 in Glasgow. It is the first multilateral climate financing targeting energy transition supported by the International Partners Group, or IPG, which primarily composed of G7 countries. To date, 4 countries, South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Senegal, have committed to JETPs with a combined financial assistance totaling $46.5 billion. Next slide, please. JETPs stand out for several key reasons. First, they really prioritize assisting developing countries in transitioning away from coal, given that coal-fired electricity generation is the main contributor to carbon emissions in the power sector. Second, these partnerships facilitate the involvement of private sector funds to address gaps in climate financing. Third, while financial institutions drive the investment, JETPs emphasize that receiving countries really take the lead in the implementation. This ensures that initiatives are tailored to local context and also priorities. Finally, JETPs underscore the importance of a just transition, whereby green transformation should avoid negative impacts on certain groups of people. Next slide, please. This table provides an overview of JETPs in 4 countries. I'd like to highlight several things here. First, the composition of the IPG varies slightly among countries, but generally, those include major powers like the United Kingdom, the US, and also the EU. Interestingly, Indonesia and Vietnam have more diverse partners. The total assistance provided varies significantly too, with figures ranging from $2.5 billion for Senegal to $20 billion for Indonesia. If we look at the policy designs, targets, and regulatory approaches within each JETP country, there are some interesting findings here. I would say that the 2 African countries have placed a strong emphasis on energy security, probably due to a significant number of people still have access to reliable electricity. So in the case of Senegal and South Africa, the climate imperative to leapfrog from coal to clean energy is very strong. In Vietnam and Indonesia, on the other hand, A lot of emphasis has been placed on retiring coal-fired power plants. Initiatives such as increasing energy efficiencies and also implementing transitions technologies like carbon capture are also highlighted. Next slide, please. Why do JETPs focus so much on coal? To provide a brief context here, coal-fired electricity generation accounts for 30% of global CO2 emissions, with China, India, and the US being the most significant contributors. As illustrated in the chart on the left side, while emissions from coal are relatively decreasing in developed countries, they continue to rise in developing countries like India, China, Indonesia, and also Vietnam. Primarily due to the prevalence of relatively young coal power plants. According to the IEA, the average age for coal-fired power plants in Asia is 13 years. And to achieve net zero targets, they must be retired by the age of 25. Despite renewable energy becoming increasingly cost competitive and the existence of tools and also policies to reform the electricity sector, the reality is that phasing out coal requires more than technical approaches. This is due to the complex political economic landscapes in coal-dependent countries. For instance, Indonesia faces challenges from powerful coal lobbies, while Vietnam's attractiveness for FDI really relies on its cheap and widely available energy sources. Next slide, please. Now, let's delve into the JETP financing mechanism. Here, I like to emphasize that there is a reason to be optimistic with JETPs. The JETP financing mechanism is massive in terms of its scale, even compared to other more mature multilateral funds for climate change, such as the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, or REDD+. For instance, the GCF, often considered the most prominent climate financing institution for mitigation with worldwide operation, has only disbursed around $13.5 billion since its inception in 2015. In contrast, JETP have promised a total package of $46.5 billion to date, solely to 4 countries. However, it is important that JETP alone might not be sufficient to assist each recipient country. For example, Indonesia requires $67 billion to finance projects for energy transitions. Even with JETP funding, Indonesia still faces a 70% financing gap. Similarly, Vietnam needs around $135 billion to overhaul its electricity sector, with the JETP mechanism covering only 11% of these funding needs. JETP also face some criticism. Primarily, the funding packages mainly consist of concessional loans and other type of loans. Grants or technical assistance comprise about 4% and 3% of public finance pledged to Vietnam and Indonesia, respectively. There is a concern that JETPs could strain the fiscal capacity of recipient countries. Next slide, please. JETPs emphasize leveraging energy transition to really unlock opportunities for inclusive development. Therefore, there is a need to mainstream the just aspect in the implementation. In the context of worker, for instance, JETP can provide an extra layer of protection. Let's consider workers' protection in multiple of layers. At the very basic level, usually countries have legislation mandating basic rights such as health, safety, and also freedom of association. Countries can further enhance these basic rights using international frameworks such as SDG and so on. On top of these basic rights, countries also must expand workers' protection, such as minimum salary and retrenchment compensations. A lot of multilateral institutions like the World Bank, the ADB, for instance, offer various programs to enhance these expanded protections. What JETP can really do is really to strengthen or add another level of protection for workers, providing them with access to upskilling, for instance, or reskilling, and also participation in company restructuring processes. It is also crucial to note that just transition needed not only by workers in the whole coal value chain, but also those who will be affected, like consumers, incumbent companies, and also cities or regions dependent on coal. The process of mainstreaming just transition should be measured holistically, considering not only quantitative results, but also the quality of the process, such as participation of labor unions in shaping the policy. Next slide, please. I'd like to conclude my presentation with this slide, discussing the implications of JETPs for Southeast Asia. To summarize, international partners have confidence in Southeast Asia's institutional capacities and also market prospects for energy transitions. Vietnam and Indonesia, as the two largest markets in the region, have already received JETPs. It is highly possible that the Philippines will soon join the JETP mechanism. Last month, the Rockefeller Foundation and the Environmental Defense Fund published a pilot study advocating for the Philippines to join the JETP partnership. It is also worth examining how JETPs can drive trade complementary within the ASEAN region. Now, with Indonesia and Vietnam committed to boosting renewable energy, there will be an increasing demand for components needed for energy transition, such as solar cells, silicons, and also battery storages. Other Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia and Thailand, who are capable of producing these components, probably stand to benefit in the future. If Indonesia and Vietnam successfully scale up their renewable energy production and also improve their electricity grids, probably they will feel more comfortable or confident in selling electricity beyond their borders. Lastly, it is important that JETPs are not a wholesale strategy for energy transformation. Rather, they allow the region to really experiment with financial plans and also strengthen their governance for energy transition. With that, I'd like to end my presentation. I'm happy to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melinda, for that very comprehensive overview of the implications of JETP, not only in Southeast Asia, but also Africa. I really liked how you highlighted some of the great opportunities presented by the JETP, but also the fact that coal power plants in Asia have an average age of only 13 years, which of course creates a lot of challenges in terms of stranded assets and already an enormous amount of infrastructures that are already there to support fossil fuel industries. So now I would like to invite Pak Paul to share his presentations on the implications of JETP for Indonesia. Over to you, Pak Paul.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. MC, our moderator, and thank you for inviting me to this very important event. As already introduced by our colleague here, I'm Paul Butarbutar, and currently working as interim head of JETP Secretariat for Indonesia. So my slides will cover what we have done and what is JETP in Indonesia, what is the pathway and so on, and also about the financing and just transitions. I'll start with these slides. So as already mentioned by the previous speaker about JETP, for Indonesia, it started actually during the G20 in Bali, although the discussion has been done previously. The negotiations was even done parallel in Bali and during the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. So the JETP announcement during G20 highlights several things actually. The first things that it will be focused on the power sector. There will be ambitions for emission trajectories in the power sector, conditional on early coal power plant retirement and international support. And also there should be significant penetration of renewable energy in Indonesia generation mix, and there should be the accelerated net zero emission target. For your information, Indonesia actually announced already a net zero target by 2060 or earlier. So we define a guiding principles for the JETP in Indonesia. It should contribute positively towards Indonesia economy. And also it should ensure energy affordability. So we don't want to see, for example, that energy transition will lead to the increase in the energy price, so that the poor people will not be able to afford the energy. That's what we try to avoid. And also, we want to also see energy security. We don't want to see, for example, due to the massive use of variable renewable, then the grid stability is disturbed. So this is something that we also don't want to see. And also, we want to see that there should be a just transition, and it should be also there should be energy sustainability. And for those of you who know Indonesia, we only have one utility company, that's PLN. So since with the role of the PLN, we want to make sure that with the energy transition, the financial sustainability of PLN and subsidiaries should not be disturbed as well. This is the thing that we really want to see in the JETP. So in return, our partners, the IPG and GFANS, promised to mobilize the sufficient capital. At the end, it is 21.6 billion over the to be disbursed in the next 3 to 5 years in order to achieve the target. So, and the disbursement will be used a combination of instrument. So I will show later what kind of instrument that was already designed. Then we determined 5 investment focus area. So the first one is actually the transmission and distributions. This is really very important that we have a strong grid, strong transmission and distributions, so that we can really the grid could absorb the variable and renewable as well as dispatchable renewable, so that we can also bring that to another part of Indonesia. So we always hear that no transition without transmissions. So it shows the very important role of the transmission in all of these energy transitions. And then the second focus area is the early coal-fired power plant retirement. We want to see that, let's say, by retiring the coal power plant, then we can replace that actually with renewable energy. This is the second investment focus area. Then we have the 3 and 4 investment focus area. That's for renewable energy. Dispatchable renewable energy, we will be focused on geothermal and hydropower plants, and also possibly as well the bioenergy. And on the variable renewable, we are thinking about solar PV and wind for massive deployment in the future, due to the reduced in the system cost. And we also want to see the development of renewable energy supply chain. With the massive investment the renewable energy. We don't want to see Indonesia only as a market for renewable energy technology. So we want to see that also the technology will be manufactured in Indonesia. So we work together with various stakeholders. So in order to work on, we established 4 working groups that help us in formulating the comprehensive investment and policy plan. We have a working group on technical led by in the National Energy Agency. And then we have a policy working group led by World Bank. And we have a financing working group led by ADB and just transition working group led by UNDP. So with all of these members, but we have resource and partners from government, non-government. We have PLN, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Finance, Sarana Multi-Infrastructure, the Bappenas, Chamber of Commerce, and other stakeholders. They provide us with informations, data, and so on that has been used and that have been used by working groups in providing in the development of the CIPP. So, and then we are now preparing the 5th working group, so-called electrification and energy efficiency. We want to see actually that the energy is actually should be conserved, should be saved from the beginning. So that's why we want to see electrification and energy efficiency as part of this JETP. It should have been included from the very beginning, but we can only do that now. So in the Indonesian context, government has established so-called task force for national energy transitions, led by coordinating minister for maritime and investment. And then below that, there is a working group leadership, and there is working group on technical and policy, working group on finance and just transitions. And then we have two supporting institutions here. The first one is the JETP Secretariat, number 5 here. So now we will providing the analysis on how the energy transition in Indonesia should be done, including later on by adding the energy efficiency and electrifications. On the other part, we have the number 4 here, Rumah Paten. That's a new working, how do you call it? It is an institution that established by government to support the implementation of the national energy transitions. On one hand, the JETP Secretariat work on analysis, and Rumah Paten work on the implementations. So, however, I have to mention here. So the energy transition in Indonesia is not only JETP. So JETP is, we work together, in fact, with many other countries. It's not only with the IPG, but also, for example, with Australia, with New Zealand, with other countries that have established a bilateral collaboration with Indonesia in order to support the energy transition in Indonesia. So when we developed the comprehensive investment and policy plan, we conducted serious stakeholder consultations. So with government, with state-owned enterprises, with embassies, financial institutions, developers associations, with CSO, think tank, and so on. We have done that until we come up to the draft comprehensive investment and policy plan. And then even after that, we still conducted stakeholders in order to get input from the stakeholders. So, and then we finalized and launched the document last November, 21st November last year. And you can actually download it from our website. So these documents, we call it a living document because there will be new technology in new policies of the government, or also new issues in the international fora, the international policy that we could include into the CIPP. Then that's why we will update this CIPP regularly. So this is the summary of the CIPP. On the technical, we put a kind of we decided to focus on grid power sector pathway, which is ambitious but still workable. And we include list of priority projects across 5 investment focus area collected from government and PLN. In the financing, we have elaborated financing need for entire power sector, and we also elaborated the financing need for priority projects. And also in the policy, we set a kind of recommendation for 7 key topics. And we also put the just transition framework for managing social and economic and environmental impact. And this is the 4th main big topic that we include in the CIPP. And then in the CIPP, you will see that we limit the emissions from the on-grid power sector to 250 million tons of CO2 by 2030, with the 44% of renewable generation shares. And the total almost 100 billion needed for just transition pathway until 2030. So, and then there are 400 priority projects with the total about 67 billion needed to start by 2030. But by doing that, we will see that there will be positive socioeconomic impact throughout the energy transition process. So this is the pathway that of the JETP scenario. You see here the blue light and dark blue here. We compared that with 2 other scenarios. One is with the PLN accelerated renewables. PLN also they have their own pathway of reaching the net zero, and also the national electricity plan also they also have their own pathway, and JETP is more ambitious of both compared to both. That's why it is conditional actually upon availability of the support from international. And this is the total amount. For example, here 19.7 billion will be required for IFA 1 for transmission and distributions in order to help us in meeting the target by 2030. And also, for example, the biggest will be for the dispatchable renewable and variable renewable. And unfortunately, as you can see here, only small amount of money is actually available for the just transitions. So this is the financing that we have checked with the 21.6 billion. This is 21 billion that is made available by our partners. This is in form of equity of 0.4%. About 10% will be commercial finance, 1.6% non-concessional loan, and 6.9% concessional, and so on. There is 2.1 billion as guarantee. This is the funding available now. So the funding can be directly dispersed by GFANS to the project, or indirect by IPG through SMI, MDB, or DFI to finance activities. And with the focus area we have here. And for example, the concessional funding, we expect actually that it can be financed through or transmission, and projects that has really low IRR we want to prioritize that to be financed by concessional resources here, for example, coal-fired and transmission. And partly also from dispatchable renewable energy, we would like to have it partially financed by concessional. The rest could be financed through the commercial. On the just transition, we established the so-called just transition framework. We have human rights, gender equality, and empowerment and accountability as foundations, with two pillars of the just transition framework: leave no one behind and sustainability and resilience. And we can show that by implementing 9 just transition standards. The standard 1 to 8 is actually quite familiar, quite similar to what the international financial community already have. Then we add the economic diversification and transformation into it. So this will be the just transition framework that we have put into the CIPP. So how we do that? So we will do assessment at the project level, and then in the intervention level, we see we do that in the project level, and as well as in the national and subnational level. So that's how we want to see the just transition happen. So some example, for example, for the national and subnational level, we could do large-scale upskilling, or by let's say building the construction of the renewable energy projects, then we could increase the electricity access. So this is only some example that we have for just transition intervention. So I want to stop here, and I will be happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Paul. Your presentation was very helpful in understanding that JETP goes beyond just coal phase out, and it covers issues such as protection of vulnerable communities from the impact of energy transition, and also development of energy security, and also Indonesia's role in becoming a producer of green technologies and participating in the green economy as both as a consumer and a producer. So now I would like to invite our next speaker, Ms. Nguyen, to provide the perspective from Vietnam on the JETP.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mirza Huda, for your introductions, and hi everyone. My name is Nguyen Phuong Mai. I represent for the Asia Group, the US consulting firms in Vietnam, to present on this webinar. And it's my honor to speak and share with you some insightful view about the JETPs in Vietnam. Let me share my presentations on the screen first. Okay. Okay, here it is. Yes, as we all know that Vietnam's currently is a fast-growing.
Sorry, Ms. Mai, your slides are not clear on the screen.
Oh, really? Let me check.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on, please. Is it not clear?
Yes, it's fine now. Yes, it's good now.
Okay, thank you.
Oops.
We all know that Vietnam is currently a fast-growing economy within the ASEAN region.
Sorry, I think there's something wrong with our presentation slides. They seem a bit hazy. Would you like us to share on your behalf?
Okay, please.
Yeah,
please
yeah.
do it. Okay, I stop from my end.
Okay, sure.
Okay, now it's clear, right?
Yes, it's good now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Vietnam is currently a fast-growing economy within the ASEAN regions, which increasingly rapid urbanizations and industrializations and attendance growth in energy demand. Vietnam's primary domestic energy supply appears unlikely to meet this rising demand, and thus dependence on imported resources is increasing. At the same time, growing concern around climate change is raising the pressure on the governments around the world to reduce the emissions and move to the cleaner energies technologies. Amid these challenges, Vietnam is working to seize once in a generation's opportunities to restructure its energy sectors to increase the use of domestically produced renewable energies and improve energy efficiencies, while ensuring sufficient generations capacity to meet the need of its growing economy. So greening the energy sectors will allow Vietnam to improve the quality of its energy services, create new jobs, and modernize its domestic industry to meet the country's commitments on emissions reduction. So in general, the government's visions for power developments, its aim at fuel diversifications and ensuring structural integrity with high priority given to renewable energies developments and the harmonizations of projects allocations across each of the country's three regions, North, Center, and the South, because Vietnam is a long country. Developing the grids in the parallel with the new project source will have ensured balance and efficiencies across all the regions. And the JETP established by last December's political declarations aim to enable a long-term partnership to support national path to net zero emissions. International partners have committed to create favorable terms and conditions for more than 50 billion US dollar investment. And at first stage, it's about 7.5 to 8 billion US dollar, while Vietnam has pledged to improve its regulatory framework, specifically related to power developments and relevance to the national strategies on climate change at the NDC. Here, I'd like to a little bit give more explanations on the number that Melinda showed on her presentations about the investment of 135 billion US dollar for the JETP in Vietnam. In fact, that is the cost required for Vietnam to implement the power development plans, number 8, we call PDP-8 for short. Because for the JETP now we do not have the expected required investment capitals. I mean in the total number, but we just point out the needs for the whole power sector developments in Vietnam. That is 135 billion from now until 2030. So that is to just give more explanations on the number of Melinda's presentations. So in general, JETP seeks to develop a long-term legal framework for the green transitions and accelerate the timeline for peak emissions from an initial date of 2035 to 2050 at no more than 107 million tons of CO2 emissions.
Sorry, Ms. Nguyen, please let us know if you'd like us to move the slides.
No, not yet.
Oh, okay, sure. Thank you.
And will reduce peak capacity of coal-fired power generations from 37 gigawatt to 30.2 gigawatt. Now I'd like to go to my slide to see what are the expected outcome of the JETP in Vietnam. Could you move the slide, please? Next one. Next. Yes, here. You can see that the JETP priorities in Vietnam point out some of the priorities that really need to attract the intentions from the Vietnam's governments. Firstly, is to improve the regulatory landscape for the energy transition. That is very important because it to improve the legal framework, to channel the investment forwards toward the renewable energies, power transmissions, and energy efficiencies. Recently, people may have heard about the success of the solar and onshore wind power projects developments in Vietnam is due to the feed-in tariff mechanism already create very favorable conditions for the investor to work on those projects. But after that, in the last 1 or 2 years after the feed-in tariff, there's not new mechanisms to be introduced, and the existing regulatory need to be improved more to create another stage of the favorable conditions for the renewables developments, as well as the transmissions, energy efficiencies. In the comprehensive pathway for the Vietnam's energy transitions. So that is the requirement that the JETP point out toward the Vietnamese governments. And the second highlight is the transitioning away from coal. That is very important expectations that the JETP partner always requests Vietnam to reduce the pipeline of the coal-fired power projects by negotiating suspensions of the unabandoned coal and transitions and closing the old and inefficient coal-fired power plants. That is very challenging for Vietnam at the moment, why the power sector still much relies on the coal power plants, which is generate nearly half, I think about more than 40% of the power generations in Vietnam now is from coal. And of course, there's some of the power plants are very old already, but to change it and to transit to a new fuel source, it's kind of challenge in terms of the both technologies and the financial investment. And the third priority that JETP would like to focus is continues to develop the renewable energies industry. That is the requires to accelerate the deployments of renewable energies, including the multi-purpose land use for the wind and solar powers productions or plants for offshore wind power combined with the marine and aquaculture and fishing. Because in Vietnam, there's a lot of potentials for the renewable, including the offshore wind. People all know that we have the long coastal area. However, there's quite sometimes it's conflicts about the interest of the how to use the lands and the sea face for the different purpose. So this is the priorities. JETP also show that Vietnam need to look at these issues carefully and figure out very specific areas to continue develop the renewable energies both in the land and on the sea. Number 4 is to improve the power transmissions and energy storage. This is really a need for the Vietnam right now, because in the last few years, we can see a lot of renewable projects has been developed, especially in the south center part of Vietnam. But due to the limitations of transmissions line, sometimes there in some area it's surplus. There's many powers to generate, but the other part of the country is still lack of the power. So to sustain the reliable grid to support the deployments and management of the renewable energy, it's quite necessary for Vietnam. Number 5, we'd like to mention is the priorities on the energy efficiencies. In this part, Vietnam doing quite well on the energy efficiencies improvement, but still there's a space to work more on this part to improve the cross-sector energy efficiencies. And number 6, I'd like to mention is the energy transitions in the transport sector. So nowadays we can see EV revolution, it's happening, including in Vietnam. Daily we can see more and more EV on the road, but we need to work more on this part. And also the JETP also expect not only the power or energy sectors to make a change, but I think the transportation is also one of the priority. And now we talk about the road transportations, but further we also can consider the marine transportations. And number 7, that is the transfer of the technologies and innovations. That is very necessary for Vietnam. The JETP also point out that is the priority when they expect to establish a center for the renewable energies and create opportunities for technological innovations. And based on that, Vietnam also could attract more private investment in the renewable energies or the new technologies for powers industry in Vietnam as well. And last but not least is ensuring just transitions. People all talk about the just, and that is I think one of the priority of the JETP. We put just on the first. That is to ensure the access to affordable energies for all. And meet the needs of those who are most affected by the energy transitions. These are mechanisms to ensure electricity for low-income group, retraining and vocational support for the worker for re-employment. So far, we recognize that energy transitions can create more jobs, but at the same time can take over the job of many old generations of the worker, especially at the coal minings, for example. That is one of the considerations, how they do the new, they change to the new career or new job from the middle age or above. That is one of the consideration that the JETP would like to point out as the expectations outcome in Vietnam. So next slide, please. Here I'd like to mention about the willingness of the JETP partner to do the investment in Vietnam. You see on the right-hand side, there's a number of the countries and partners willing to support and invest into Vietnam. However, in the left side, in the pie chart, you can see that the share show how the finance, the cost to be used in Vietnam. You can see the grant one. It's very small share. It's only about 4% of the commitment. Here, I just mentioned about the first stage, which is about 7.5 to 8 billion US dollar for the first stage that the partner already commit. And the grant to support for the government of Vietnam, it's limited at only 4%. I think some of the countries or partners are start working with Vietnam on this part to support for the governments, especially to improve the regulatories or legal framework to facilitate for the energy transitions and especially develop more renewable energies in Vietnam. And the second part in the red color one, that is the concessional loan that the partner or other countries could support for Vietnam, which is only about 34%, less than 3 billion. So with these concessional loans, that would be a great support for Vietnam to develop the new project, especially when they want to apply the new technology, which is very high cost in the global market. And the last part is the biggest one. It's the investment through the FDI mechanism, which is when the Vietnam have the really good mechanisms for investment, then it would be easy to attract the investor to come, like we success with the fit-in tariff in the past. So in the JETP period, I think the international partner also expect that there would be very favorable legal framework issued by Vietnam's governments to facilitate and attracts more investment in this regard. So next slide, please. Here again, I would like to emphasize on some of the facts that has happens in Vietnam. Firstly, we can see
sorry, Ms. Mai, we're a bit over time. If you can finish up in 1 more minute, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, there's the expected the realities and the expected outcome. I'd like to just mention a little bit about the gap here, because the Vietnam already demonstrate the commitments through their statement and the political will present at the COP26 and also the PDP-8 or the National Energy Master Plan. And some other related political declarations. However, the Vietnam has not presented a comprehensive set of regulatory reform yet until the moment. It really takes time for Vietnam to work in this part, because it requires the involvement of not only the government office, but also many related industry. The key one is the Ministry of Industry and Trade that we call the MOIT. And one of the challenges for Vietnam now is to ensure the sufficient power, which is they consider the LNGs and offshore wind could contribute a lot here. However, Vietnam has not made a significant progress in approving the regulations that will enables for LNGs to power and offshore wind power to develop. So this is the challenging path for the foreign investor. Expect to develop the new projects in Vietnam. And the realistic next step, Vietnam should work to ensuring the PDP-8, which is the focus on the feasibilities of the context of the present political and economics circumstance, and follows by plans to reduce coal. I think Vietnam is working on this part, but until now, the PDP-8 approved, but its implementation plan is in the progress, and hope it soon be approved by the government, so all the projects could be executed in the facts. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Ms. Mai, we're really a bit over time. If you can finish up in the next 20 seconds, it'll be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next, please. I come to the last slide. Yeah, this is the main policy chain that Vietnam need to work hard to achieve the JETP target. The first one is the political challenges, because now the ongoing regulatory delays and the impacts of the Vietnam anti-corruption campaign is caused a lot of delays on the regulatory developments at the moment. That is one of the challenge I would like to mention. The second one is economics, when the incomplete framework to challenge JETP financings and enable returns on investment. That is the biggest challenge that Vietnam cannot effectively use the JETP financial source. And the third one is a technical challenge when Vietnam is lack of the supportive industry and domestic infrastructures to develop big ticket for the renewable energies in the countries. And the last one is a justice challenge. There's not any directions or guidance issues on the implementations of a just energy transitions. So this is now it seems the very first stage to work on the just what of the JETP. So I think that is one of the challenges that Vietnam need to really look into it and deal in the coming years. Otherwise, we may meet the power or energy target, but we may not meet the just targets in the JETP. So I'd like to end my presentation here, and I'd love to share with you more idea during the Q&A sections. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mai. And I would like to thank you for highlighting the issue of regulatory frameworks, which is often overlooked in the context of the JETP. And I see some important overlaps within your presentation with what Paul mentioned about developing green industries. And now I would like to invite Dr. Julia to speak about the issue of social and economic impacts of just transition in the context of moving away from fossil fuels. Over to you, Dr. Julia.
Thank you so much for having me in this wonderful webinar. Thank you for everyone who's attending. I've already seen some familiar names in the participants, so that's really great. Yeah, I will try to be brief, so we still have some time for questions and answers. And I will speak a little bit more coming from the social science perspective on the just transition in Southeast Asia and the first lessons from Vietnam. So I think I don't need to go much into depth with this question, but I still would like to have some reminders. What does just transition actually mean, and where does it actually come from, this conceptual framework? It comes from the workers' movement in the United States, beginning in the 1970s, and has always been a movement for decent work and for interconnecting social and workers' rights, trade union questions with the necessary transformation that we see in our economy in order to tackle current ecological crisis that we are facing. Since then, it has not stayed only with the workers and the trade unions, but it has been adapted by a variety of actors for different fields. And especially over the last decade or so, we could see that there has been strong adaptation of the concept by the climate movement, for example, as well globally. And they have successfully extended the concept and idea of just transition beyond this focus on workers, and also included other aspects of justice. But I will speak about that a bit more in a minute. For international policies, the guidelines on just transition by the International Labour Organization is key, and is also very often referred to as a guiding document in defining what just transition means for international multilateral policy action. Yeah. So, but what is just transition then in Southeast Asia in the specific context? So we have to see, as I mentioned, that just transition is coming actually from a context in the United States and in the global north. So it is an imported concept, but it has multiple connection points in the context of Southeast Asia and in all its diversity. And it has been adapted for governmentality and the ecological modernization program in Southeast Asia. What that means is that, for example, government actors, states, have used it to implement their policies, to frame their policies, but always in this ecological modernization program, which means that the problem of the current ecological crisis is not searched for or not identified in the current economic system per se, with the belief that we can solve the climate crisis, also biodiversity issues, and so on, within the current economic framework that we have. So within a capitalist market-based economy, and there's civil society voices that question that, if that is actually right to have this ecological modernization program, and if we should talk about green growth or if we should abandon growth at, like, overall. Currently, the just transition is focused on a just energy transition, but as we also heard from the previous speakers, it's relevant for other fields as well. It's relevant for mobility, it's relevant for the food sector and agriculture and so on. But through policy initiatives like the JETP, the focus at the moment is in the energy sector, as it's also contributing a huge amount of greenhouse gases, and thereby climate change mitigation needs to look at the energy market. We have various actors that try to impact discourse and practices of the just transition and just energy transition. So what we can see happening, for example, is that governments took over this just transition framework, which originated not from government actors, but from movements and civil society, and kind of adapted it for themselves and redefined it. And the question is, does this adaptation in the policy field actually still meet what the movements initially set out to achieve with it, or does this co-optation by the discourse actually water down what just transition means? And in Vietnam, we actually can see that it does water it down, as I will talk more about in a second. And lastly, it has gained momentum due to multiple international development and investments projects, like the JETPs, for example. So the just transition in the coal sector, it combines many different parts to the overall puzzle. It means reskilling of workers or trade union participation in the process of the transition, plans of structural changes for the regions. In Vietnam, this is really important because the regions with a lot of coal power are not the regions who are gonna grow under the renewable energy investments. So you actually need plans for the whole regions, because you cannot just retrain a worker, because that would require a lot of mobility within the country. You also have things like early retirement schemes. But apart from this, from looking at how workers can transition justly with the phase out of the coal sector, we can see that it has many co-benefits as well. For example, improved health, you have nature restoration efforts, and much more. So this is not only about jobs, but it is about much more wide social questions of health in Vietnam. Air pollution, for example, is a key question concerning social and health policy at the moment. That is also impacted by the just transition. Yeah, and you can see my former colleagues from ISEAS who are in the room can see I borrowed the graph from our last events here. So what should a just transition actually entail? beyond this inclusion of workers and trade unions, it should include fundamental analysis of justice aspects within a given framework. So we should not only look at if workers get compensated, reskilled, and so on, but there's also a question of procedural justice, distributive justice, legal justice, recognition-based justice, participatory justice, gender justice. So there's a lot more to this. And Vietnam, for example, the government of Vietnam rightly said that an aspect for them that is missing in the JETP is the historic accountability of countries in the global north who have contributed most to climate change, and that giving loans is not the way forward in addressing this justice aspects, but actually the share of grants should be much higher. In the national sphere, the Vietnamese government has defined justice as access to energy and access to affordable energy and workers' rights. But a lot of other justice aspects, as you can see here, are actually missing in this JETP framework in Vietnam. And also the participation of various groups is not guaranteed. So in the JETP agreement, there is a sentence that says that NGOs and media should participate, for example. But in the current political climate in Vietnam, this is severely lacking. There have been multiple arrests, as I'm sure many of you who are knowledgeable of the context of Vietnam know, among the leaders of the non-state sector who have worked on the energy transition on charges of corruption, tax evasion, for example. But actually this political move has silenced a lot of voices that could critically contribute to making the just energy transition actually just. So this is highly problematic in the context of Vietnam. There are opportunities and challenges that we can see. So despite the shortcomings on the justice aspect I just mentioned, we surely do have the opportunity that the JETP can lower emissions and create a momentum for policy change. We saw that PDP 8, the Power Development Plan 8, came out way too late, but it actually came out with after the JETP agreement was made. And we can see that the PDP 8 refers to the JETP. So it says that under the condition that financing is actually getting into Vietnam, then we can achieve this transition of the energy sector in Vietnam. And the JETP agreement in Vietnam, it also does integrate workers' concerns and trade union participation, although we have to keep in mind, of course, that within the Vietnamese framework, the trade unions are aligned with the state due to its alignment with the Communist Party of Vietnam. And there's not really there's a limit on how critical and independent this can be. The challenges are that the discourse is taken over by government actors, so the discourse of just transition, and they are redefining what once belonged to movements and are watering it down. So in the instance of Vietnam, just limiting the justice understanding to access of energy and affordable energy, which is important, but it's not enough. And the IPG countries, if they agree to this and if they do not challenge the Vietnamese perception on that, it runs the risk of also lowering the bar for what justice actually means in the energy transition in other JETP partner countries. It's some kind of precedence here to to focus more on the energy transition part and not so much on the just energy transition part. And we have the issue, but this is also not wanted by the IPG, but nevertheless, from a research perspective, it is also a challenge that the JETPs are not tackling systemic issues and not so much ask how much growth can we actually afford, but it's rather like a business as usual scenario, just a bit more on the greenwashing side. What does it mean for aligning strategically a strategic interest? It means that we need to recognize that there will be always trade-offs between different actors, between governments, civil society, trade unions, and we need to keep a close eye on who has to give in, which also reveals the power structures behind the JETPs. We need to strive for transparency with strategically placed closed-door meetings. So, of course, not everything, not every negotiation can be public, but wherever possible, we need to lay out all the necessary information for non-state actors to follow the process and to critically comment on it. Communities are key. So for large-scale solar and wind investment, communities may be dispossessed of land. They might be impacted in their way of living, their social relations. So we closely need to look at how communities are affected. Finally, international fora are important and can create space. So maybe what cannot be said in Vietnam because of the authoritarian setting could be maybe said in international fora. And with that, I would like to close and thank you very much for your attention. Looking forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Julia, for highlighting the fact that transition entails much more than energy and also goes into issues such as health and impact on the natural environment, and your highlights of the particular gaps in implementing JETP in the political context of some countries was also very insightful. Unfortunately, we're a little bit over time, so I would like to request the audience to stay with us for 10 more minutes beyond what has been scheduled, because we have some very interesting questions and we're looking forward to an interactive discussion. So I would just like to start off the Q&A session by combining two questions by Ms. Julia and Ms. Melissa. And these questions are directed towards Melinda and Paul. So firstly, in the context of the JETP in Indonesia, what are the various obstacles to the smooth rollout of the JETP, whether it's coming from the traditional power sector or from the renewable energy sector? And what kind of pushbacks are we expecting against the implementation of the JETP? And does the new government in Indonesia have the appetite to address these challenges that can impede the JETP, particularly when we consider the power of the coal lobby, which was also mentioned by some of our speakers. So over to you, Paul, and then we can hear from Melinda as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions. So when it comes to what could become a barrier for the implementation of JETP, so as you know, the JETP we have to look at two issues. The first is the project, and the second is the funding. The project could be the coal power plant, the transmission, the renewable energy, and so on. So on the financing side, as I mentioned from the beginning, the JETP is conditional upon provision of the international support. So when we discuss, for example, the pathway for the JETP scenario in Indonesia, we see that we model the scenario. We have three scenarios actually. The first one is working on the coal phase out of about 0.1 5.2 gigawatt, and then but we check with our partners. Apart from about 1.7 gigawatt that has been committed through the energy transition mechanism managed by ADB, no interest actually could be are there for the financing of this coal phase out. So that's why we have to take out the coal phase out from this scenario. So we are only focusing on the 1.7 giga. So Indonesia has already set actually the energy transition pathway, including in that actually the coal phase out, but natural phase out. Natural phase out means when the contract is ended, then automatically the coal power plant will be phased out. So the JETP intend to accelerate this phase out, but if no one would be willing to pay, then there will be no phase out. So what was discussed after that is actually so-called managed coal phase down. Means we want to play with the flexibility of the coal power plant. However, there is quite a certain risk in there. For example, PLN as the utility company contract with IPP. They contract for the capacity payment. Means actually the owner of the coal power plant will have to make their coal power plant available. Let's say, for example, for 80% of the operational time. So just imagine if PLN will have to ask them to reduce the availability to 60%, reduction in 20%, means PLN has to contract another sources of energy. Let's say it will be renewable energy. So PLN has to contract twice. So PLN has to pay for the availability of the coal power plant, and at the same time also has to pay for renewable energy. So this is not the issues actually. If no one would really be willing to pay for this coal phase out or coal phase down, then the introduction of renewable energy will be slow. So we will only be able to develop renewable energy with the growth, with the projected growth, not to replace existing one. So this is one of the main issues, combining the projects and technology and the financing. The second issue really on the transmission. So the demand side is actually centered around the Java Island or partially in Sumatra, while the demand side is in that Java and Sumatra, but the supply side is actually mostly far from this island. So that's why we really need transmissions to replace this, to be able to evacuate energy from supply to demand. I can give you an example. Indonesia has allowed the development of coal power plant for the let's say smelters or facilities that add value to the mineral. So that's why for example, in island like Sulawesi, there are some smelters developed, but the connections to the grid are not available. So one of priority project for JETP is actually construction of the transmission line for the south and southeast of Sulawesi, where the smelter is actually located. So it needs funding. So the funding is not there yet. So because we are still trying to see how the financing from IPG could really work, could really be deployed for financing this kind of priority projects. So projects is an issue, financing is an issue, but apart from that, actually, there is administrative things that need to be looked at, especially if one make decisions on phasing out coal power plant. What would be the administrative thing that would have to be implemented? Is there any legal risk for the one who made decisions? This is also one important aspect of the coal power plant phase out. So when it comes to the let's say the new government starting October, so I have checked. There was 3 candidates in the presidential elections last February, and we have checked what was their platform when it comes to renewable energy or when it comes to energy transitions. Seems to me that they are actually on the same page, that they say, okay, we will go with the energy transitions. The only thing later on, actually, whether the funding is really available for the JETP. So, as I said, it is conditional. So, if the funding is available and the project will be, let's say, project procurement will be done by PLN, then actually the transition will be done as expected. So, this is the positive, the optimism that I have, considering what is now going on in Indonesia. Of course, we can always stay a bit pessimistic, and I will reserve that. But let's see what will happen after October. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Paul. Melinda, do you have any comments?
Yeah, maybe I just want to answer a question from Julia, my colleague here at ISEAS, about the resistance. Oftentimes, if we look at resistance, we often see it from the higher level, right? The corporations that will lose out in this energy transformation. But in the context of Indonesia, I talked with many CSOs. Actually, a lot of people on the ground, civil society, and also especially SMEs in Indonesia, because SMEs plays so much important role in energy transition. They provide a lot of community-based approach, community-based projects for energy transition. The financial mechanism of JETP is mainly concessional loan, right? So it means that multilateral banks, MDBs, will disperse the funding. To access the funding, actually, these companies or a guarantor must have like a certain size of operation, or they call it a ticket size. So a lot of SMEs are concerned with this inaccessibility of getting the fund from this mechanism. Yeah, maybe I just want to highlight that.
Thank you, Melinda. Now I would move on to some other questions. And once again, I'll combine some queries by Emmanuel and Tu Vu. So the question that these guests are asking is regarding how do we actually address the gap between what is actually required for energy transition and what the JETP provides? And how do we see the implementation of the JETP in Vietnam and Indonesia in the next 6 to 12 months? So I will first request Ms. Mai to respond before we move to Pak Paul, and then we will have some questions directed towards Dr. Julia.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's very interesting, but also challenging questions about Vietnam's JETP implementations. We all know that the JETP, just point out the expectation, it's very high. And at the same time, Vietnam, those we already approved for the PDP-8, which is the goal in the PDP-8, it's in line with the JETP, but it's true that there's the gap. Because the challenge of the government of Vietnam, I mean the Vietnam in general right now, it's firstly to ensure to meet the demand of the domestic demand first. That is more important. And then we consider the energy transitions, which is more in line with the JETP target. So that's two question. It's hardly to answer by just one set of actions, because you can see there's some as I mentioned in my presentation, the coal power plant, I mean the existing coal power plants contributes more than 40% of the power generation for the countries. And even though still it's not enough, according to our predictions, the demand keep increasing rapidly, and the big scale of the power need to be constructed, because right now the renewable projects, normally the size of the project is not so big. And to contribute to the base loads to ensure the power sustainability of the power supply still require a big capacity of the power plants, which is scale of the LNG projects or coal thermal projects or the offshore wind projects, the scale that could contributes to the base load. But in Vietnam, I think that your question is point out when or how the JETP to be implemented in the next 6 months to 1 year's time. I think it's already start because Vietnam's government is now working on the regulatory improvement. Of course, the progress is happen. It's a little bit slow due to some domestic issues related to the anti-corruption campaign is happening now in Vietnam. But the government is working on the framework, legal framework improvement. And of course, the new we expect that something similar, similar good as the feed-in tariff that we had in the past. But I don't think the government would ensure another feed. But the government are considering how to facilitate to welcome the big capacity power first, and at the same time develop the renewable projects. So for the big scale plans, the governments now pay attention to two types. One is the LNG, which is imported gas from global market, and the other one is offshore wind. As I mentioned earlier, the offshore wind, it's have the great potentials in Vietnam, but due to many conflicts of interest on the maritime space use, so that is why the government need to take a little bit more time to consider, to make sure that when they select a site or some site for the offshore wind, it will not give any impact or effects to other interests on the sea, especially the sea coast of Vietnam is play very important role of the transportations, and it's also not only the economics but geopolitical role. It's very important here. That is why when select the site for the power project, it need to be very, very careful. That is why it caused some delay in the survey stage. So I think that the JETP is happening in Vietnam right now. It's mostly focused on the regulatory improvement. And secondly, it's some study on on the futures of the job creations or the beneficiaries who will enjoy the energy transitions after the next 3, 5, or 10 years time. So Vietnam starting with that point, and at the same time considering how to match the JETP goal in align with the PDP-8 implementations to ensure sufficient power supply for the domestic demand, and at the same time gradually to meet the energy transition target. So I don't think that it will happen in the short term, but we need to be patient a little bit during this time for Vietnam, I think.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mai. In the interest of time, I would actually go over to Dr. Julia, and I will return to Pak Paul for his comments. So we have two questions for Dr. Julia. Firstly, are there any qualitative indicators that can be used to evaluate or track just energy transition? And secondly, what can the international partners group do to mainstream the concept of just transition in the JETP process, and what role do civil society organizations play in this endeavor?
Thank you so much for the questions. I mean, first of all, I would say that justice is a deeply qualitative value that is hard to assess within quantitative indicators. However, there have been some outlines by different actors how to ensure that something is just, so like lists of characteristics that you need to check up on, but there's not like one centralized one. You have some from NGO coalitions. The Climate Action Network is very much at the forefront of commenting on this from the civil society side, for example. You have characteristics in the ILO guidelines when it comes to workers. So there are different ways of approaching it if you're looking for inspiration of how to really ensure justice. The responsibility of the justice aspect by the IPG is actually also a bit tricky, because of course we don't want to repeat neo-colonial power patterns with the IPG countries telling countries in the global south what to do. Nevertheless, the governments are not the only relevant actors to a JETP in the countries, and they cannot, just be ignored because some authoritarian government says they don't want them included. I think what is really crucial is to meet with civil society representatives and to talk with them in safer spaces. So not necessarily, on a big table where also the government representatives are sitting, but really have safer spaces where representatives can voice their concerns. And also the IPG needs to re-evaluate and maybe critically view when a just energy partnership is actually a JETP or only an ETP, like only an energy transition partnership, in order to not water down the discourse further and set the bar lower across countries. And I think definitely that for a democratic and participatory project, that civil society, in the different shape that it has in every of the countries in JETP, should have a permanent seat at the table.
Thank you very much, Dr. Julia. Now, I'm quickly going to go over to Paul to see if he has any comments regarding how he sees the implementation of the JETP in Indonesia in the next 6 to 1 year. And we also have a question from Jordan Lee regarding what can be done to make it easier to access the JETP funds.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So on the time frame of this up to the next 12 months. So in fact, we are actually already implementing activities by providing this, working on the CIPP and so on. But when you are thinking about the actual project implementation, so there is already a good example of projects that has been classified as JETP projects. There was a tender for let's say a package of projects, a small-scale project as part of the conversion of the diesel to solar PV, hybrid diesel solar PV and storage. If you have heard about the de-dieselization program, the winner have been announced. Two consortium have won the project, and PLA is now preparing for the next batch of the de-dieselizations. That's one thing. The second thing, we are looking at, let's say, a study, several studies actually, looking at how the just transition will be operationalized. For those of you who have seen our CIPP, you only see a small portion of the framework. But actually, what we want to see later on as part of the study is we want to have, let's say, operational guidelines for the project owner, for the subnational government, for financiers and so on. So that later on we can see, once a project is evaluated and constructed, what need to be done by project developers, what need to be done by financiers, and what need to be done by subnational and national governments. So this is a package that we want to have within the next 12 months. We also want to see, we are starting now the study on the captive coal power plant, because in the future, if nothing changed, there will be quite amount of captive coal power plant developed. So we want to see how they can decarbonize. So the same thing, we are now working on the energy efficiency electrifications. We want to see how we could implement the energy efficiency and electrification measures in order to decarbonize. So that's what we will see in the next 12 months. And at the same time, parallel to that, we want to see also a project procurement and so on done by PLN coordinated by Rumah Paten. So when it comes to the question from my friend Jordan, what needs to be done in order to facilitate financing? And this is also one of the challenge that we see as part of the JETP. Indonesia and Vietnam, or JETP countries, are expected to accelerate the decarbonizations of their power sectors. On the other hand, we also expect that the financial sector will also need to accelerate their process. This is now what is still not there. So we expect, for example, the financial institutions, MDBs, DFI, and so on, if they really want to support the JETP, then they really have to check how they can accelerate their process. So the thing is, the IPG money mostly will go through the MDBs or DFI. So if if they still work under the business as usual model, then we will not be able to accelerate. So on the financing side, so this is the challenge actually that we will see later on, whether we will be successful in the utilizing all of the commitment from the IPG countries or not. Then it will very much dependent on the let's say reform in the financial institutions, whether they would be willing to change their procedures to accelerate the deployment of funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm afraid we're out of time, and so I would like to apologize to some of the audience members whose questions we are unable to answer at this point in time. But I would like to express my gratitude to the 4 speakers. Thank you very much for joining us today. We certainly learned a lot about the JETP and also the issue of transition in Southeast Asia. And what I've personally learned is the JETP is not just about coal phase out, it's also about grid development, the development of green industries in the region, and also about really trying to understand what the gaps are in terms of the social and political context in which the JETP is applied. So thank you very much to the audience members as well for joining us today, and we hope to continue the conversation in the coming days as we further do research and webinars and discussions on the JETP and the broader issue of energy transition. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.